Good morning, everyone, and thanks for attending our webinar. The purpose of our session is to give you an opportunity to listen to the experiences and lessons learned from Dutchess Bosse's, Spack and Kill School District and Millbrook School District cyber governance team members and how they got started with their cyber governance journey. My name is Joanne Kraus, and I'm a cybersecurity facilitator partnering with Acture Solutions and Dutchess Bosse's to help school districts to make cybersecurity and cyber safety a priority. I have been working with Bob Knapp to facilitate this process with school districts. Um, Bob, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I've been working with school districts since the early 90s in technology, but certainly in earnest for the last 10 or 15 years on cybersecurity. And our organization has had a long partnership with the team at Dutchess Bosse's involved in technology. And together we put together the initial group of Joanne, myself, Mark Stein, who you'll be introduced to in a moment, to try to help districts really focus on a number of different aspects of the cybersecurity topic, but this one in particular. And we hope to share with you a little bit about how that program works and what the experiences have been over the last 5 or 6 years. So, welcome, everybody.
Thanks, Bob. So, in my former life, I was a technology director and dealt with cybersecurity every single day. And in working with Bob and with Mark Stein from Dutchess Bosse's, we put together a program, and there are a couple of things that we learned that we accept as truisms. Cyber governance is about cyber risk management, and it does take an organizational approach. It's not just an IT issue. Our technology teams can't do this alone. It's important to build a cyber aware culture that includes everyone's attention and participation, similar to our physical safety and protocols. Everyone needs to know what to do. The other truism that we learned is that cyber governance is hard because it involves people and process and constant change. So you really need to stay on top of it and keep the conversations going. So that's exactly what our conversation is about today. We are going to meet a panel. Our panel brings together three organizations: Dutchess Bosse's, Spack and Kill Union Free School District, and Millbrook Central School Districts, who have begun this process. And we'll hear about their challenges and what they've done to continue the momentum and to make in making this an organizational approach. Mark Stein will start with talking about why cyber governance matters and how he brought this about through Dutchess Bosse's. Um, in addition, um, we'll meet our panelists and we'll give you the opportunity to add to the discussion. So we want this to be an interactive process. We do have a sharing segment at the end, but please feel free to ask questions throughout. This is a Zoom webinar. There's a Q&A. You can ask a question anonymously or using your name. So ask your questions throughout, and we will answer some throughout, and we will also have that segment at the end. So this webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording and the slide deck at the end. All right, so let's let's hear about who is in the audience. This image here may resonate with many of you, and you'll see as we meet our panel, everyone does wear a lot of hats in their current roles. So, would you take a minute to, Lydia, we have you in the background. Would you take this poll and tell us what is your role in your district? And if your role is not in one of the selections, please type it in.
Have a couple of unique positions that are joining us. We have a good amount of technology directors. We have some data protection officers, assistant superintendents. Some superintendents.
So it sounds like a good mix.
So it sounds like we do have a good mix of people with diverse perspectives. So um, let's go on to meet our panel. So please join me in welcoming Mark Stein. He is the Director of Technology at Duchess Bose's. Mark, would you tell us a little bit about your background and what role you play in the cyber governance process?
Sure. So, hi, everybody. As Joanne mentioned, my name is Mark Stein. I'm the Director of Technology here at Duchess Bose's. I've been at Duchess Bose's for about 15 years. I've worked with Bob Knapp and CSI at the time, now Acture, since then, so for many years now. As part of this process, I'm helping to facilitate the cybersecurity governance process along with Bob and Joanne. But in addition, we helped sort of create and build this service in order to assist districts. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Mark. John Farrell is the Assistant Superintendent for K-6 Curriculum and Instruction, is also the Human Resources Assistant Superintendent, and he also wears another hat as Data Protection Officer. So welcome, John. Can you give us a little background about you?
Sure. Thanks, Joanne. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, so a few hats, just like Elliot. It's the way it goes in small districts for assistant superintendents. I've worked in Spack and Kill for about 15 years. I was a building principal for about 10 of those years. And I would say my tech background was, I'm 56 years old and I know what 56-year-olds know about technology. I certainly wasn't a wizard in that area. And as a building principal, I would say, pretty removed, didn't appreciate probably how important, how serious cybersecurity was, because in large part, everything, due to Brett and his team always really works great and works well. So when I transitioned into this role, I started and technology became something more that I was working closely with. I really just started to learn and appreciate more. And I do think, for the people that are watching, having, Brett having somebody in some sort of positional authority is helpful. So I think it's been a really interesting journey for me. I'm not sure that Brett is saying anything too differently now than he was saying 5 years ago. I just think we've come a long way in appreciating kind of Brett's message. So really appreciate doing this work with Brett now.
Well, thank you, John. Brett Hasbrook is the Director of Technology at Spack Union Free School District. Brett, tell us a little bit about your background and how you're leading this process.
Good morning, everybody. I've been here at Spack and Kill for I think I'm going on my 21st year now. And before that, I did a couple years at Duchess Bosse's. That's where I started my educational technology career. So, I've been doing this a long time, and cybersecurity, from the people that work with the technology every day, cybersecurity isn't something new. It's definitely changed over the years. Um, you know, 4-character password doesn't cut it anymore. But not only has the technology gotten more complicated, the the response to cybersecurity threats is no longer just contained in the technology department. It's not just a matter of clicking buttons and turning knobs and flipping switches to keep your network secure. You need buy-in from everybody in the district, because everybody in the district's a potential way-in for the bad actors out there. So working with Joanne and Mark and Bob and the other folks that we've had in our meetings has been tremendously helpful to change the culture in the district and have it a little more focused on cybersecurity, which is a tough thing to do because cybersecurity is a pain in the butt. It makes things more difficult. Two-factor authentication is a good example of that, but it's definitely necessary. So they've been tremendous help in Spackgill and helping us kind of turn the tide and making that more of a priority.
Thank you, Brett. I'd like to introduce Elliot Garcia. He serves as the Assistant Superintendent for Business and Personnel in the Millbrook Central School District. He also wears another hat. He is the Data Protection Officer, and I'm sure I've missed some of the hats that you do wear. So, Elliot, thanks for joining us. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Thank you, Joanne. So yeah, in addition to the things on the list here, I started in public education in central administration as a director of facilities many, many years ago, and in that role, I worked very closely with our tech teams as things evolved from analog systems into digital systems, things like physical building security, cameras, phones, technology has a way of permeating every corner of what we do over the last 20 years or so. It went from being a little group in the organization to underpinning the entire organization. And I feel like I've had the benefit of growing up professionally in that world. So I've served as facilities director, I've been an HR director. I came to Millbrook as the director of technology. So actually my work with most of the group on this panel started out in that director of technology role at the very early parts of our cybersecurity initiatives, working with Brett and Joanne and Mark and Bob. So we've known each other for quite some time. I feel like we've kind of grown in this realm all together. And I think to John's point, the message hasn't changed, but the ears receiving it have somewhat evolved, mine own included. And I think, those of us that have come from different perspectives, John coming from the instructional side into central administration, myself coming from operations into central administration, I think we have we have different approaches for the same mission, and that's to make this message understandable, digestible for everyone involved. And like Brett said, this is something that everybody's responsible for. So it went from, I think conceptually, the tech guys in the basement, this is a them problem, to nope, this is something that we're all responsible for in a different way, and we're going to help manage that message and help everybody understand how they play a role. And I think we're going to cover a lot of that today, and I'm looking forward to it.
Great. Thank you, Elliot. So, Mark, let's help the audience understand how we got started with this, or tell us briefly about the NIST Cybersecurity Framework Advisory Service and what prompted Duchess Bosse's to create it.
Yeah, sure. So I'll go back to when Ed Law 2D was first introduced in 2019. It had sort of this brief mention in there that said that school districts would need to adopt and comply with the NIST Cyber Framework. And so while that was, like I said, just a brief mention in the regulation, that's a big statement, right? So there's a lot to NIST. And again, just so everyone is on the same page. NIST stands for National Institute of Standards and Technology, and it's the cyber framework that New York State law requires us to adhere to. So within this, there's a total of about 100 and over 100 outcomes that we have to work towards. And so that one sentence has a lot of weight to it. So naturally, as a group of tech directors in Dutchess County, we get together every month, and we started talking about it. How are we going to tackle this? Where do we even start? So we started by thinking, okay, well, let's add it as an agenda item in our monthly meeting. We'll talk through it. We'll cover it there, and as a group, we'll just go through it a little bit. And so that's what we started to do. We actually started to look at some different controls that were aligned with NIST because they were a little bit easier to read and digest. But we quickly found out that that wasn't enough. We were just talking about it. We weren't actually doing anything. We weren't actually accomplishing and getting closer to complying with NIST. So the districts naturally came to me, and we talked as a group, and we said, okay, well, we've got to approach this differently. We've probably got to do something a little more formal with this. And so that's the perfect opportunity to develop a service to help districts. So we started looking at that. We partnered with Acture to develop the service. We knew NIST already. We knew that it was, like I said, it was going to require a more formal approach. We knew that there was more to it than just technical knob turning, right? It involved processes, procedures, documentation. And it also touched on areas outside of technology. It includes stuff about purchasing and risk management and onboarding. And so these aren't all areas that are just under my purview as a tech director. So yeah, it needed to be expanded and throughout the agency, throughout the school districts. And another requirement of NIST is that it has to include governance. That's part of that framework. So we knew that as well. And then, so we had the beginnings of a service based on all of that. Acture helped us identify a web-based tool to use to help us with the process, which helped formalize it as well. And as a tech director at BOCES, I always volunteer BOCES to be the guinea pig in anything. So, right. So we were the pilot group. And what I did to start the process and to start the pilot here at Dutchess BOCES, we first started by identifying who should be on that governance team. And really what that means is the governance team has to include the decision makers, the leaders of the school district, because a lot of high-level decisions have to be made. We established some foundational training sessions so that everyone was starting at the same point in terms of their knowledge of cybersecurity. We created a little subgroup of people that sort of got in the weeds and did all the busy work, right? And did the work outside of the governance team. And we started using that assessment tool, which was the web-based tool that I spoke about. And so we were the pilot. We started bringing in interested districts. And so this year we have 8 out of 13 school districts participating in the service. So that's just a little bit about how we started, how it's sort of structured, and what led us to that point.
So, Mark, you're unique in your position, right? You're unique in the fact that you are overseeing the governance process with Dutchess BOCES along with your data protection officer, but you're also extending it to the school districts. So from that vantage point, what were some of the most common lessons that you learned that you shared when you started the service with the districts?
Yeah, so I think most of the challenges were around the governance team and establishing that and keeping it going. And I know a lot of times that when people came to some of those governance meetings initially, they didn't quite understand why they were there, right? So we had a lot of questions. Okay, what's my role? What do I do? I thought this was an IT thing. So that was That was something we quickly realized that we had to have senior leadership buy-in, because without that buy-in and support from a superintendent, assistant superintendents, it's very easy for folks not to attend these types of things, right? So we had to have those leaders really support that process so they could, in effect, require people to attend and make this a priority. So that was really key, I think.
So thanks, Mark. What I'd like to do next is bring in the full panel to talk about their initial steps and their challenges and how they also maintained a momentum to keep this going in building this process. So I'm going to bring everyone in, and let's start with Brett. Brett, as a technology director, what prompted you to subscribe to the NIST CSF service? Can you tell us about your experience and how you went about getting buy-in from your senior leadership, like John, who is sitting here with you?
Yeah, like John alluded to a little bit, um, technology departments have been kind of preaching, cybersecurity for a while. And I can only speak for myself, at least here, it kind of started falling on deaf ears because they got tired of hearing me. Um, as cybersecurity became more and more of an issue, because it got to the point where it was starting to impact other processes and people in the district, but they didn't quite understand why we needed to be more vigilant about that kind of thing. And just because they enact a law saying we need to be NIST compliant doesn't mean we're all suddenly experts on NIST and all the requirements in there. So having a way to make this process of becoming compliant a little more formal. People tend to listen to people from the outside the district. If they tell them this is the way it is, they tend to listen a little more to that than if I say it. So that was helpful to let them lend a little more legitimacy to the process. And bringing John on board and making him part of the process was probably the biggest change we've had in this district, because he's been tremendously supportive. And being the assistant soup, he's got a little more ability to make people pay attention. I'll put it that way.
Yes, and John, looking back at the beginning stages of creating this process, what was your strategy in securing the superintendent's buy-in? Was that something that you had to go and do?
No, I don't think, particularly. I think this, superintendents have, we all have long lists of things that we're responsible for and things we need to do, and superintendents have that and then some. But it's a different list, So Brett and I have worked with Dr. Fanueli for a long time. So I think there was a level of trust there. I don't think, he certainly didn't need to be convinced that cybersecurity was something really serious, something that was important, and something that required all of our attention. But I think there's also the reality that, superintendents typically aren't going to be able to dedicate the time that this kind of work really does require. And I mean, I think it's hard enough for me, for Brett, for Elliot. There's a lot to do. And I think one of the things that the service did at least provide us was it gave us a structure that insisted we meet marks and get things done and stay on schedule and schedule time to meet with one another. So I've through the service and work with Brett, I know so much more about all of it now than I did when I was a building principal. So I would say, no, certainly the superintendent didn't need a lot of work to get on board, but I think organizations need to have somebody If it's not the superintendent, it does need to be somebody high level that Mark alluded to, that needs to be at least have an appreciation and an understanding for why this work is so important. So I do think the high level build, high level is really important, but I think that's only one component. And we're probably going to talk about the structure of governance teams, and maybe I can talk more about that in a bit.
Yes. Before we talk about that, I wanted to ask Elliot, from your perspective, in your position, and your superintendent's leadership, how do you have something different to add to what John said about getting the buy-in from the superintendent?
I think for me, same with John and Brett, my superintendent is incredibly supportive of this work. And I think it stems from, our superintendent is a leader in the region in school safety initiatives in general. And I think for me, I came into this district as a tech director right at the doorstep of the COVID pandemic when we put all of our kids, we gave devices to all of our children and all of our staff members, and we put everybody online. And one of the very next questions was, how do we keep everyone safe in this online environment, right? So that high level of awareness of student safety that we had on campus needed to translate into a digital world rather quickly. And so I think, we kind of leveraged an existing hotspot and just kind of stretched it into the technology world. And so there was pretty quick buy-in in that regard, right? I mean, who doesn't want to keep our kids and our staff safe and understand how they're operating in this new digital environment that was amplified by the pandemic and remote learning? And none of that's gone away, right? I mean, the state laws have evolved to allow for remote and hybrid instruction during snow or weather events and things like that. So none of this is going away. And I think because our superintendent is so involved in all things of student safety, it was a natural lean. I also just wanted to underscore something that John said. I think as central administrators, regardless of title, but just more in terms of role, is not only do we have influence, but we have perspective, right? We see the district from that central office vantage point, and we see the entire district. So I think it's really important to get buy-in from your senior leadership team for no other reason than they see all the departments, all the buildings, and we understand the interconnectivity of all things. And as technology is, right, connecting all of our people and all of our students and all of our things, you want those central admins to really understand what's happening, because these initiatives are only function well and they're only effective when they're implemented comprehensively.
Thank you, Elliot. So John, going back to John, can you talk a little bit, you have the superintendent's buy-in. Now you need to assemble your cyber governance team. What does that look like in Spack and Kill? How'd you get their buy-in? What did you do?
Well, I'm not sure that we initially had their buy-in, but at least when we were in a position to schedule a meeting, there was an expectation that people show up and be there. So there's that piece. I think, there were a couple of obvious roles, right? The idea that school business manager be involved, our personnel associate that's dealing with onboarding, offboarding, our technology integrator that's on the ground and working with teachers and students all of the time. Those were obvious ones. We have somebody in a data coordinator role that deals with a lot of tech related stuff, so we wanted her to be part of it. So those were, I think, obvious choices. I think the other, maybe the biggest non-negotiable for me and for Brett, was to make sure that all building principals, we're a relatively small district. We have 4 building principals, 2 elementary and middle and a high school. And as Mark said, right, the district level leadership is critical, but I mean, my experience as a principal, just tells me it's, district office can put out edicts and require and say and do lots of things, but to really get stuff done on the ground in buildings, it really requires principals buy-in and their participation. So to affect change with staff and students, we just knew that it was critical for principals to be part of that. And I would say, if we had a do-over, and we're probably going to get to this later on, I would have, if there was any way to do a tabletop that very first meeting, like I would have done that, because that's what ultimately got buy-in from our governance team. Because it's for a lot of them, right? Some of the stuff you really are getting into the weeds, but a tabletop was what really made it real for the people on our governance team and made them appreciate the work that we were, trying to do, and why it was important for them to be part of it.
Okay, so Elliot, what about your district? How do you assemble the team? Does it look different in terms of the stakeholders who are involved?
So in our district, I mean, we're a pretty small district here, so it's not so much picking who's on the team, it's telling the team what they're doing in this capacity and in this environment, right? My leadership team is my four principals, our central administration, and some of our department heads and central office leads. They're at a table for every conversation, whether it's physical safety, whether it's strategic planning, whether it's, it's the same folks in the room, right? So it's just kind of reframing what we're doing in today's admin meeting, and we're doing cybersecurity today, right? And so it's what I think we need to be careful of is it's just another thing, right? I'm going to speak to those districts that have smaller, more nimble leadership teams with all the hats like that slide was earlier today, and so the apprehension is always like, oh great, here's another thing that we're all going to have to work on together, right? The next heavy lift, and so like to John's point, making it real. The tabletops is something that made it real for our people because, again, like I use that analogy of my first offices, I think for the first 10 years of my life were in basements with no windows. I always make that joke, and they're like, oh, this is the tech guys in the basement. That's a them problem, right? But if you guys remember, and for the panelists and anybody that's attending and listening, a couple months ago, Google Classroom crashed. And everybody kind of looked at us and went, what do we do? I can't get into Google Classroom. Fix it. And my tech guys were saying that we can't fix it. It's not an us problem. It's a Google problem, right? But there was that momentary panic of like, I can't get into Google Classroom for 2 hours or a half a day. What do I do? And so we kind of used that and pointed to it and said, okay, so in a cyber governance meeting, listen, if we get attacked, there's no Google anything. And it might be days and it might be weeks. So you, building principal, like John was saying, right? Talking to your instructional leaders who don't live in this world. But in that moment, what are you going to do as an instructional leader? What are you telling your teachers how to react and respond to this? And so those tabletops, those real world examples, this is what it means to react and respond in the moment, 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. We lost our internet. We have to air gap, right? We have to disconnect ourselves from the world to make sure that we stop the bleeding digitally. And this is how education is going to look for the rest of the day or the week or the month. We've had colleagues out there that lost, their digital environment for upwards of a month, and they had to go analog and, pencil and paper. And 30 years ago, it was no big deal, but 30 days ago, people would have freaked out, right? So I think that's just really where a lot of our buy-in started. And I agree with John. The more real you can make it for people, because honestly, for the first year or two, when I was doing this work, I kept asking, and it wasn't even the folks on this panel, but I had other facilitators I was working with before I started working with this BOCES group, and I would say, okay, I get the high concept, but what does this mean to my district the day I get hit? I have to go to the superintendent's office and say, if we get attacked, we have to be prepared to do X. So for example, if I got a cyber attack on a Tuesday, I've got roughly 72 hours to get the business office online, or people aren't getting paychecks. So like kids aren't learning, people aren't getting paid. What do I got to do right now today to activate our response group? And so taking all the jargon out of the equation, there's so much benefit for so many of our people just to give them that little bit of information as a starting point. And I think that was really helpful for us in implementation.
Yeah, and Joanne, I just to jump in here, that word tabletop has many, many meanings out there. You'll hear it used, but it can mean all the way from little flashcard drills that are done with tech teams. The tabletop that both John and Elliot are referring to are a series of exercises that we developed that are really whole of organization exercises. We tried to build together some scenarios. They start out simple, but then build on each other as time goes on. But they really were designed to bring some of what has just been shared with you, and to get principal to think about, okay, this is the scenario that's now in front of me. What am I telling my teachers? And what helped bring that to be real for all of them was realizing they didn't know what that answer was and having that first uncomfortable feeling. And then everybody would go, okay, I understand now why this is all our problem. And we all need to get together and talk about. And for the facilitation team, it's been very gratifying over the years to watch as we continue to build these exercises out, to watch the district teams grow and to see the things that at the beginning stumped them, that now they know right what they're turning to. They know what's going to happen in the first couple hours. They know exactly how to handle it. Same way they know how to handle it when the fire drill bell goes off or any other event that is practiced. And we're continuing to talk about the further nuances as as these get more sophisticated as to what's next. And it's interesting to watch them ask the additional questions. So yes, and that is something that we ourselves learned. We thought we needed to spend at least a year getting a governance team up and functioning before we wanted to hit somebody with a tabletop. But the feedback that we're getting is we should maybe start with those earlier, very early on in the process to help answer the question, why am I here, for so many of the administrators who are not in any way directly touching technology.
Yeah, and I think those exercises are very eye-opening for everyone except technology because we're used to it, right? But that's the first time that they have really talked about what will happen if nothing's there, right? So what will we do in our roles? So it's a good exercise to have.
Yes, and what we like, as Bob alluded to, is hearing other positions like your curriculum and instruction, asking questions, and also realizing that education, that awareness and training needs to be a part of the everyday conversation, and you need to have a plan set in place. When we first started this, we waited and helped districts to build their incident response plan. But in the beginning, when we did the tabletops, they didn't look at that plan. So now going back, and John, you're smiling because I think you were one of those districts. Um, we went back, and it gives you the opportunity to sort of refine that process. And so I think that it was a lesson learned for all of us, right? To get everyone's attention. You don't need the plan initially to do the tabletop, but then the tabletop will point to the fact that you need the plan and you need the playbook and you need the communication piece. So I just wanted to, I noted that we have two data protection officers here that are not the tech director. And in many districts, we see that that role is sort of combined with the tech director. Brett, was there any reason why your district decided that John was the going to be the DPO?
Well, I think a lot of that was driven by, well, the initial guidance from the state was it shouldn't be the director of technology, it should not be your data protection officer. And I think the reasoning behind that was one, for kind of oversight, but two, the more people that are thinking about this kind of thing, the better, because as we've stated, this stuff is not just the responsibility of the tech department anymore. It's the entire district's responsibility. So if you've got somebody outside of the tech department that's also thinking about data privacy, that just makes your response to it that much better. Especially if it's coming from the central office, superintendent, assistant superintendent, business, whatever it is. And I think it's worked out very well in our case. I know some districts didn't make that decision, and that role is those two roles are done by the same person. And maybe that works for them, but in our case, having that role split out, I think has been beneficial.
Joanne, there's also the provision in my contract, like all assistant superintendents have other duties assigned by the superintendent.
That other.
So
That
yeah,
other is
I
there.
think we
if I
all
knew
have
then
that.
what I
Yeah.
knew now, I might have pushed back a little bit.
My favorite, John.
So if we want to talk a little bit more about, how you maintain the momentum and you built this culture of shared responsibility. So my question is going to go to Mark. So based on your experiences with building this governance process, how has that contributed to building a culture of shared responsibility? I know that in the beginning you were doing everything, the tech department, and somehow you managed to define those roles, especially with HR. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think this whole process, this whole project, I'll call it, and the fact that we entered it in a formal way, right? We're using a formal tool and we're building a governance committee, and so there's a lot of pieces to that. I think the fact that it was its own program and we were all working towards it, it allowed me to work with some of the other departments and share with them. So, for example, onboarding, right? That became human resources responsibility, and they own that process when we entered into this project, which is great because if you think about it, yes, the tech department are the people. They're pushing the buttons to give access to people, but that doesn't mean we should be making those process decisions or making those kind of decisions in a vacuum, right? It all starts with HR in terms of that specific area, and they were excited to own that because it allowed them to refine some of their processes as well. So it just entering into this initiative, I think, allowed us to look at all of this differently and realize that, gosh, this isn't just about clicking a button. This is about developing a real process around this.
Elliot, do you have anything that you want to add to what Mark talked about?
I think Mark just queued me up for answering the last two questions. When you were asking Brett about the separation of duties with the DPO and Mark's response, I mean, if you tie those together, that's my answer, right? Mark just spoke about, and I'll say it a little bit differently, identifying the difference between who grants access and who decides who gets access. And in my role as the business official and the HR person, and working with our instructional team, me and our assistant superintendent for instruction, we're in lockstep, like we're attached at the hip in so many ways, especially in this world, right? Because when Mark spoke about onboarding, my first thought was like, yeah, for Mark's team to create those accounts, they need at least 3 points of PII, and then we're transmitting protected information. And so when we started this process in Millbrook, we were like, oh, we have to tighten up even how the HR office speaks to the tech office, because even in that, we're transmitting protected data, and I'm sure John and Brett can speak to how many systems manage data, right? My tech leads handle our SIS integration with transportation and with single sign-on, and they handle how the data moves. But asking them to then make decisions on who should have access to which points of data is something that a lot of our tech people are not comfortable with, nor should they be, right? Because these are instructional decisions, these are operational decisions. And so many times I get an email that's copied from somebody. Sometimes it's our help desk because so-and-so wants access to this system. And they say, I need administrative approval before we can just give you access to that, basically a data set of protected information, right? So I think as part of my role as a DPO is really filtering out who needs access versus who gets access. And the other piece of this that I would share is, in terms of how we maintain momentum is working with my head of instruction and really looking at our software subscriptions. I think there's a major exposure point in terms of student data. When you take a step back, and for the instructional folks on the call, think about how many of your people have access to sensitive or student information or student data, and how many of these websites want to collect your data, and how many times from our tech friends have we said, if it's free, it's not free. Everything's commodified some way, shape, or form. If they're not charging you money, they're taking your data, they're taking your information, they're selling it to somebody. And one of the scariest things in the data privacy world is when that teacher emails you and says, hey, I've been using this free subscription for 3 months, and can we pay for it? It's great. And I say, how did you use it? I uploaded all of our class data, and they're helping us analyze it. And I'm like, no data privacy agreement. We don't even know who these people are. We haven't greenlit it, but people with the best of intentions can create these gaps in security. And it's just that building that awareness, making it part of our culture, understanding that our labor force, as John referenced earlier, by sharing his age and time in the district. I mean, my labor force is teachers right out of college that are 24-year-old digital natives that have spent their entire academic lives online, and teachers that are 2 to 3 years from retirement who graduated college with pencil and paper reporting and library research and no digital environment. And we're trying to make all these folks play nice in the sandbox together. And it's requisite on us, I think, to be that filter and to be that guiding light through the process.
Thank you, Elliot. Well said. So I'm going back to John. John, I know that you have a technology integration teacher, and she plays an active role on your governance team. Can you talk about how her role helps the process and connects the dots with all departments and with teachers and students?
I think that there are a few things, a few ways. I mean, we built structures that allow her quite a bit of access. I mean, obviously in the classroom, she's working with teachers and students, but we have 2 separate standing technology committees, an elementary tech committee and a secondary committee that meets monthly, that Marcella chairs those committees. So it's a very good way to filter information, to talk about issues related to cybersecurity and software and our processes. We also have a group that we call our tech fellows, that are people that if there is new technology or new software, they're typically the first to pilot it, to try it, to work with it. And she meets with them. Marcella attends our monthly principal meetings and often presents to principals. So she's really much more for us than really just a tech integrator. Brett and I meet with her monthly. So I think she's been really critical as far as being able to serve in a supportive role, especially because more so than really anybody else, she's closest to teachers and kids right now. And that's really, really beneficial for us.
Brett, I've heard that you have a protocol in place for conducting phishing campaigns. And can you just talk a little bit about that and how that changes your culture?
We use a product called Know Before, and we were sending out training videos a couple times a year. Previously, watching those videos was not required. And one of the changes that has come about as a part of this process is now it's required for those teachers to watch. We do 4 10 to 15-minute videos a year. We spread them out roughly every other month. That was all worked out with the union, make sure they had time to watch those. There's 5-question quiz at the end, just to kind of make sure they took that. But it has definitely had an impact on our end. The people that those get sent to are definitely more, I don't want to say paranoid. They're definitely more conscious of the stuff that's in their inbox, and they will question things more than they used to, which is, I believe email is still the #1 way that malicious actors get inside of a network. So that's been something we've been focused on for a while. Now making it mandatory and teachers actually doing it, we're definitely seeing an impact, positive impact on the other end.
So it sounds like, according to John, that has become a non-negotiable. You were able to get the buy-in from your governance team, from your superintendent, and to explain the why to the teachers union, to make it stick.
Joe, yeah, just to add a couple things to what Brett said, I think that's been a really, if I was going to say if there's one thing that has helped move the needle for us, I think it's been that training. So if organizations don't have something like that in place, whether it's KnowBe4 or something else, I do really think it's critical. I would say if we had it to do over again, we would have made it mandatory maybe earlier. So now, when Brett assigns a training, we get to the point where we print a report and we see who hasn't done it, and then we filter that to the building principals, and then the expectation is that principals are going to follow up with those people to make sure those trainings are completed. I think the other piece with it too, that why that platform has been successful for us, is the content is really, really good. I haven't seen one that at the end of it, I was like, wow, that really, we could have, done something different with that topic. I think the content is really good and they're reasonably short. I think the other piece that has been helpful is a lot of the content, it crosses over to people's own personal lives, their own personal life of email and cell phone and phishing and all of those things. So I think that's something that has evolved too, right? There are so many more instances. I mean, do any of us go a week? I mean, I don't, without having something come through email or a text where somebody is trying to do something bad to me. So I think all of our staff realizes that, and I think that's caused them, to be much more careful in their personal lives, which we benefit by that on the organizational side. So I think the training piece for us, like Brett, we don't hear anybody complaining about those trainings. At least I don't. So I think that's been something very helpful for us.
And that's great. You've made a lot of progress with that. Mark, I know that at BOCES, when we first started, you were just starting out with having your annual required training as part of Ed Law 2D, but then you also built and edited other layers of protection by having role-based training, and you're one of the few organizations that we know who do it really well. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So we knew right away that one of the requirements of Ed Law 2D was that every school district has to provide annual cyber training. So we knew we had to start somewhere. I think, as you sort of alluded to, I think it's been an evolution, right? So one thing about this entire process, not just the training, is it's very easy to get overwhelmed, right? It's a lot, as we mentioned earlier. And so what we've tried to do is not get really stuck anywhere. You just got to jump in and start somewhere. So we use a different tool for the annual training and the phishing training. We use something called InfoSec. And so the first year we just got the training out. We built one of our data privacy specialists employed here at BOCES created a campaign. The tool allows us to pick and choose from different modules and build a campaign with some assessments built in. And so we just built that initial training, and each year we get a little better at it, right? So we're at a point now, we've been doing this for maybe 3 years, I think, 3 or 4 years. And we're at a point now where we fine-tuned it to where the folks in the facilities department are getting very different training than the teachers are, right? Because there are some physical environment related modules that we can include for them. So administrators, managers get slightly different training than teachers do. So it's very, as you said, we've gotten to a much more refined role-based training. And what I find is that each year, different things come up, right? So one year, I think Elliot mentioned earlier, MFA was a thing, and so we made sure to include a module related to MFA. Um, the next year, we may say, okay, everyone's pretty well trained in that topic. Let's take that out and replace it with a topic we haven't talked about yet. So it allows us to sort of fine tune that and evolve over the years.
And you've also had help with your data privacy specialists. I know that when we first started, you didn't have those roles. Can you talk a little bit about how those roles help BOCES and also how they provide support to school districts? And I know that Elliot also in Millbrook is benefits from that support staff.
Yeah. So again, when EdLaw 2D was introduced, we quickly recognized that, this could be something that we can help districts with. So we reached out to the county. We worked with Dutchess County to create these civil service titles of a data privacy specialist. We currently have 2 data privacy specialists employed here. Um, the service is really easy, really straightforward, right? That data privacy specialist can help BOCES and the school district who subscribe to it with anything related to EdLaw 2D. So basically, they're helping their DPO with whatever work they need help with. That could be anything from, we know we have to vet all of the software before we use it. And so that was a really, initially, that was a big deal because not everybody was doing that. And so we had to get on board with vetting software. It could be to make sure your website complies with EdLaw 2D. There are a list of things that you have to have on your website. It could be to implement this training we were talking about. One of our data privacy specialists, Carol Matthews, she created the annual training for BOCES and maintains it. And so, yeah, it's basically anything the DPO needs help with that it's related to data privacy or NIST.
So Elliot, do you want to add anything to what Mark has said about that position
Uh,
helping Millbrook?
Absolutely. I mean, I agree with everything Mark said, and perhaps this is the business official brain activating in my head, but this is all of the things we're talking about today are about resource management and time management, right? I mean, can you do these things on your own? Sure. Is it going to take longer? Yes. Do you have the resources on your own that this group, has collectively? Probably not. And so for us, when we started working with Nick, our BOCES person with that. It's the speed at which Nick has, resources at his fingertips where he can get me the information that I need to approve or disapprove or disallow a platform. Like John said, we wear a lot of hats. We're in a lot of stuff, especially in a smaller district. And so having the resources where I can just email Nick or call Nick and say, hey, is this good, not good? Are we concerned? Where are we standing with this? My teachers want to use it. What's going on? And be able to bounce that stuff off very quickly without bogging down my in-house tech team or consuming the limited resources we have in the district. I mean, it's been really helpful. I would say working with this group, expanding that question out to just the entire process of our cybersecurity work. We've literally shaved years off of the process just by working with this cohort and this team. We're probably where we are today, we'd probably be 3 to 5 years away from had we been trying to trudge through this on our own in and amongst all of the other daily tasks we have to do, and probably not to the same level of efficiency or effectiveness. So incredibly helpful, and I can't speak enough about the resources provided by Mark and his team and everybody on this call.
So thanks, Elliot. So looking to the future and thinking about how you measure the effectiveness of your cyber governance initiatives, um, I'm going to go back to Mark. What do you consider to be successes and positive impacts of your governance processes? You mentioned a few already, but
Yeah.
what are some key items?
I think one of the one that I point to a lot, and I've mentioned it here already, is it's allowed us to really make great strides with our onboarding and offboarding process. The fact that HR has owned that, and we have been working with them very closely to refine that process, which is important, right? You don't want someone to leave and have that access remain open. You know, that's a security risk. So we've been able to really sort of close the gaps there. The other one I'll mention is just awareness, I think, across the agency. I now get, and I think maybe Brett or John had mentioned this, I now get a lot of staff forwarding me things saying, this looks funny, you know, this doesn't look right. And that's great. We want to encourage that because that gets people thinking, and they think twice before they do anything. And I always tell people, if you're not expecting it, don't click on it. Forget trying to hover over links, and you know that's all good information. But if you're not expecting it, just delete it, and the person would reach out in person if they really needed something. So yeah, I think just awareness and some of our processes and procedures and being able to advance those have been great.
And when you talk about processes and procedures, I'm always afraid to say this, but are we all documenting those processes?
Well, it's interesting. That's and I'm on a lot of these meetings with many districts and ourselves as well. And that's the one thing I think we have found is that we have procedures for things, we just haven't documented all of them. And that's important because that's also whole. Like, right, what if someone left their role and someone else has to come in? You don't want them starting at the beginning again. And so it's really important to have all these things documented.
No, as I recall, that was stated to us as the number one finding of the SED technology reviews that they've been doing over the last couple of years, was not that there were no procedures. It's just they weren't really well organized and written down, and that's
Yep.
where the biggest hole was. So yeah.
Yeah,
Elliot,
Joe, and that's the question that Brett and I hate maybe more than any other. Is it documented? Because there's a lot of stuff we do and we've always done, and it's not documented. It's better. It's more documented now than it was, but it's still
right.
It
So you,
probably will never end, John. So
yeah.
keep documenting.
so going back to Elliot from a business official's perspective, what are some of the things that you want to communicate here to superintendents, to tech directors, things that you have learned in your position in terms of dealing with the budget? Sorry if I said the budget word, but
It's a bad word in May, Joanne. Come on, we don't talk about that. We just cross our fingers for the next 2 weeks and we hope for the best, right? No, I mean, listen, this is one of those things, and it's so parallel to building safety and security. You know, an ounce of prevention is worth more than a pound of cure, right? Like, and the cost of prevention is often more or more manageable than the cost of the cure. So if you think about, you know, one of the spooky words we deal with is ransomware, right? I mean, do I invest a couple of dollars every year in a BOCES program and a prevention program to avoid a six-figure, you know, ransomware threat or possibly, you know, weeks and weeks of lost instructional time? I mean, that's what we're talking about here, right? So I think as a business official with my background being what it is, I just understand the value of making these investments on the front end. You know, there was a cost to play, and Mark and I worked very closely over the last 5 years with these optional things that very quickly became not optional, right, Mark? I mean, we talked about you talked about MFA. When Mark and Duchess BOCES introduced MFA, it was an option to tighten up security. And then within the same year or two, there was an option for cybersecurity insurance. And I think within 2 to 3 years of those options, they became mandatory and they became required. And to the point where our insurance carriers would not provide us with cybersecurity insurance if we did not have MFA and a number of other requirements in place from a cybersecurity realm. And it's like, you know, what's the value in that? I don't know. What's the value in having locks on the doors? Just because nobody, you know, no bad actors walked in the door doesn't mean we don't need locks, right? You know, you can't prove a negative, but you just believe that the prevention is there and it's doing its job. And these things just aren't optional anymore, right? They're part of our lives. I think, like Mark was saying about the phishing, and Brett and John were all speaking about these phishing exercises. When we implemented that program, people would literally call my desk when I was the tech director and say, "Hey, I got this funny email from a guy named Mark Stein. What do I do? Should I click the fish hook?" I said, if you're suspicious, if it's spam, report it as spam, right? And now, a couple years later, I'm walking down the hall and I'll get somebody go, "Hey, I clicked the fish hook and I was right. I knew that thing was spooky and I caught it," and then they're excited about proactive like discovery of these phishing exercises. We're just building it into the culture every day. Like Mark and Brett and John said, we do it from new teacher orientation day. We do it from the point of onboarding. This is how we do things in our district. And just like 20 years ago, it was we wear the badge around our neck, right? Or 15 years ago after Sandy Hook, right? We started locking the doors and making everybody wear their ID badges, and it just became part of the culture. These initiatives are no different. They're becoming part of our day-to-day operations. They're becoming part of how we do what we do. And it's not an option. It has to happen.
And Elliot, I also want to mention the fact that you have formalized this process and you have strong communications, and you also have everyone in terms of when you do the tabletop, you have your superintendent there, you have all the key players, in addition to having a board member on your team.
Yeah, we
So
do.
I think that's very interesting because it gives more perspectives.
Well, and
And
I'm
go
sorry, I
ahead.
didn't mean to interrupt you, Joanne, but I just want to say, we made a joke about it being May and it's budget season, right? I spend money on cybersecurity. I'm a business official, and my superintendent supports us budgeting for these things because there's such a value there, right? And I think, we say it in so many different environments. Cost is only an issue in the absence of value. There is so much value here that the cost is palatable and it's necessary, and we just need to underscore the value of what we do and the risk of not having it. And so having my board president and vice president at the table for these tabletop exercises is communicating to the board, who makes the ultimate fiscal decisions, like, we need to invest in this because this is how we continue educating children. This is how we continue paying our people. This is how we keep the wheels turning in the event of a terrible incident. That needs to be communicated across all constituencies, from the board to the community and everyone in between.
Yes, I agree 100%. So John, I want to ask you a question about your governance team. What's one key area where your team is still learning and evolving? And what are your future priorities?
I guess a couple things come to mind. Definitely more tabletop work. I think that's in the future, and I think the biggest thing that I feel like for us right now is we've got to do some more work with our disaster recovery plan, our continuity of operations plan, and that's scheduled for this summer. I think that's become a non-negotiable as well for us. The idea that we have something written down, plans in place, that the appropriate people have those plans. They know where and when and how to access that information. I think those are probably the two biggest things for us right now.
Elliot, what are your future priorities?
Very similar. I think, for us, I'm trying to get to a place where I feel like our back of house is a little further along than the front of the house is in terms of preparedness. And so, one of the things that we're looking to implement is actually having analog lesson plans at the ready in the event that we need to do a tech blackout for any reason. I'm very focused on what that looks like, especially with the evolving regulations as we're getting into spring with high temperature regs, and we may have to send people home with devices, and so our learning environment is in flux once again, and I think our team is really going to dig a little deeper into how do we keep kids focused and learning with technology and absent of technology in the event that we have to react and respond to an event, while also keeping all the wheels turning on the training and keeping everyone front of mind focused on prevention.
Mark, do you have anything to add to that in terms of your future priorities?
Yeah, I hate to sound like a broken record, but the tabletops are just so valuable. And it's hard sometimes to get them scheduled because it's a lot of leaders in that process, right? So I want to continue with that. In that same vein, I want to continue with making sure our governance team meets regularly. There are always things to talk about, always things to review. That governance team acts as an advisory committee. So there are, I don't want to just do things like turn off ability to plug in flash drives without talking to that committee, because they provide that support and act as, like I said, an advisory group. So I want to keep that. That's really important to keep that going as we've been going. So.
Thank you. So, we're getting to the end of our session, so I have a final question for everyone. Um, the question is, what is the most important lesson learned you want the audience to take away from this discussion as they consider building their own cyber governance team or refining the process that they already have in place? So let's start with John.
I guess for me again, it's coming back to the same items. I think um, training is really critical to so to have something in place um, to make sure that people are being trained the way that we need to and learn more about the importance of all of this. And then I think just making sure that you have plans in place for if and when something happens. I think, continuing the road that we're on with our team, but those really continue to be our focus. And we have to stick with it and keep working in those ways.
Great. Brett, do you have anything that you want to add on to that?
I don't think I have anything to add beyond all of the things we've talked about already. I think that's all the stuff that we've kind of learned collectively. Training's important. Uh, Building some kind of a governance team is important. Getting buy-in from the instructional folks is important. It's not just a tech department issue any longer. I think we touched on all that already, and that's really what I've taken out of this whole process so far.
Mark, what about you? What do you want the audience to remember and take away
Yeah,
from it?
so I think don't forget BOCES did this just like the districts did this, right? So we piloted the program, and I think at first it was very overwhelming. It's a heavy lift. And so I guess my message around that would be don't let that overwhelm you to not take action on these things. Just start somewhere and just keep going. And even if you're getting overwhelmed, this structure has been very helpful because we've had the support from everybody here, and so it we were able to overcome that, but it can just even just complying with NIST can be overwhelming. So I would say just keep going. It's a continuous process. It's never going to end. It's something that just evolves and that you just keep chipping away at.
You're not
One step at a
overwhelmed.
time.
You're doing it wrong.
What did you say, Brett? We didn't hear.
Said if you don't feel overwhelmed, you're probably doing it wrong.
Elliot, what do you want audience members to take away from this?
I agree with everything everybody else said, right? This on the first day of this initiative, it feels like you're about to drink from a fire hose, right? But you just take one sip at a time and you move forward. And I think one of the things that was our tagline during our pandemic reentry planning was the Dwight D. Eisenhower quote: "Plans are useless, but planning is indispensable," right? And so we can't prepare everyone for every possible eventuality, but if we start orienting our people in how to take the best practices and put them into place to maximize our level of prevention while also preparing to react and respond in an appropriate manner should things go sideways. It's just reframing our mentals and getting ourselves as best prepared as we can be to protect our people and to keep our districts operational. So take the time. It's going to be daunting, like Brett and Mark said. It's spooky, it's scary, it's a lot. One step at a time, one foot in front of the other one, and every bit of incremental progress really does make the district stronger.
Thank you, Elliot. I also want to say that everyone who is in this panel, one of the strengths that you have is that you made this commitment as a district to schedule time to meet every week and to work on your controls and your measures and your documentation and to do the assessments, so that you're continuously working at it. And you also have a plan with your governance team to meet at least, 3 or 4 times a year, to make it meaningful and to keep them informed and also to empower them. So those are what all of you are doing and spoke about it today. And I thank you all for
Joanne,
yes.
we did have a question pop in through the chat as we were sort of finishing. So let me read it and we'll get the thoughts of the panel here. I know what I would say, but I figured I'd throw this out and just let you all talk to it quickly before we go. It was, do we have or offer a cyber governance toolkit or how-to guide, something that emphasizes the necessity that we can distribute to our local districts to help them build their own teams? And I assume they're cyber governance teams. Anybody on the panel want to react to that question?
Mark?
I think we've all developed things as part of this process for our own folks, right? I think that just participating in this process sort of prompts a lot of that. I don't know that we have just some sort of deliverable or something like that we've got it all sort of summarized in one place necessarily. Those are my
So,
initial thoughts, I think.
Bob, did you want to add to that?
Whether we're talking about exactly how it evolved in BOCES, or how it evolved in Spack and Kill, for how it evolved in Millbrook, and Joanne and I working with probably nine or 10 other districts, we've seen that same thing. Everybody's sort of twist on this is a little different. And so at the moment, I cannot say that there is a simple, concise, clear, cookie cutter how-to manual that just says, follow these steps. There are lots of resources that we've run across inside the BOCES program that certainly we can share with districts that are working with Mark's service. They can help get this launched. And certainly, if there's more behind this question and more discussion, anybody who's on this panel, I think, would be happy to continue a conversation with anyone that was in the audience. So feel free to reach out either through Mark, or I forget how we left this as to what the contact information is, and I'm sure that's about to come up on one of the screens. But reach out to us and we'll be happy to get back with you and continue a dialogue and see if we can't point you in the right direction.
So yes, Bob, each participant in this webinar will receive the slide deck, which does have some resources, which will give you some information. There's a link to the COSIN website, which actually has a document about getting started and a few tips. And here on the screen is a QR code and the email address to keep this conversation going. And if you have additional questions, please feel free to reach out to us. So I want to thank everyone, all of the panelists, Mark, John, Elliot, and Brett, for participating in this with us. This was a candid conversation about how you began your governance journey, and we'll continue it going forward. So thanks again, and I appreciate your time. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.